I think what you brought this up. I mean, I think me and you are in a kind of an agreement here with the Buckner situation. Neither of us were expecting him to get full drives. And there was certainly a time in the second half that I would have liked to see it, just because it would have been something different. And maybe that's when that spark is provided. But I honestly thought, with essentially a month to prepare for this game, there was going to be a game plan for Buckner that didn't, like, this whole idea that, oh, it's Coan's team, he deserves to be the starter. He is the starter. Like, it was going to be him 90% of the time. But, like, leaving a weapon of Tyler Buckner, of his, leaving the weapon of Tyler Buckner, I guess, just not even in the game plan at all was kind of, flustering to me, flabbergasting, if you want to even go that far. And just because you've seen what he's done in other games this year, without full drives. I mean, I know, like, you look at Virginia Tech, he kind of brought Notre Dame back. That's more of that spark that maybe he could have provided in this second half. But there were just several times in the red zone this year, or in short yarded situations, or when Coan is struggling, so you put Buckner in for a few plays just to kind of get it going. He had that really long run against Stanford when they were up, and it was like, okay, they were up against Stanford by a lot, and you knew that they weren't going to lose that game. You're up 28-7, 28-14 going into halftime against, Oklahoma State. And I know it's a bowl game and you want to win and you want to stick with what's working. And the passing attack was certainly working in the first half, but it doesn't mean you have to completely not go to a guy, like I mentioned, who is probably a top 5 or 6 weapon for you on offense this year, and especially without Kyron Williams playing in the game. So that's what was frustrating to me, is that Tommy Rees, as much as I love him, and I'm a huge Tommy Rees guy, I think he's a terrific coach. He's going to be he's going to be a college football head coach here soon, I think. They were even reporting on the broadcast that he turned down the highest paid OC gig in the entire country to go be with Brian Kelly. So obviously, I know Brian Kelly likes him. Maybe that doesn't do it for other people, but it does it for me enough to know that someone like that, who's getting big time jobs, thinks that highly of someone. So, but it was frustrating, to say the least, that Buckner couldn't get in the game plan somehow.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. Like you kind of mentioned it. You would sort of think that, it was all over Twitter today that when things were rolling well for Notre Dame offensively, it was, Brian Kelly had his guy Tommy Rees handcuffed to a certain degree. And maybe that's true. I really don't know that that's as true as some people make it. I actually tend to think Brian Kelly helped Tommy Rees in a lot more situations than Notre Dame fans realize, which is also why I think if Brian Kelly is the head coach for this particular game, Notre Dame, hold everything equal up to the point where Notre Dame gets up 28-7. If Brian Kelly's the coach at that point, which I don't know, like you mentioned, I don't know that Notre Dame gets up 28-7 with Brian Kelly as the coach. I don't know. But if Brian Kelly's the head coach at that point, I don't think Notre Dame loses this particular one, because I think he helps Tommy Rees along. When the offense starts sputtering, Brian Kelly's the guy that interjects and fixes it, I think. Now, Brian Kelly's not here. Tommy Rees has to learn. And like I say, I don't know. So where am I going with this? I don't know. I'm frustrated. But, to your point, I guess I just sort of thought that, like, as everybody is saying, Brian Kelly handcuffed Tommy Rees. Well, why then, if Tommy Rees is calling the shots, did he not go to Buckner? You know what I mean? You would think that if it was completely true that Brian Kelly had not, given Tommy Rees full reins, well, that would imply that Tommy Rees maybe would have been frustrated at some point by the fact that, I can't go to Tyler Buckner whenever I want to. I can't call this part of the playbook. Well, that's not the excuse today, So I don't know. It is interesting, like I say, at the very least, to see that Buckner didn't enter the game, but I don't know. I just think that at the end of all of this, these are not going to be questions, I guess, that we'll have next year. I mean, it's going to be Tyler Buckner, and we're going to ride or die, and we're going to do those types of things. And, I think Notre Dame will be better off for it. Doesn't help us today, but that's my silver lining, is that I think Notre Dame will be better off for it in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think me and you are kind of in agreement there. I mean, this future is certainly bright overall. Two things I wanted to bring up that I thought were interesting. And obviously, this goes back to Coan. I don't want to call Coan a statue, but he's certainly not a running quarterback by any means. And that's when they ended up struggling in the second half. When have you ever seen? When's the last time you saw Coan make a play with his legs that didn't include picking up just a few yards on the ground? Like for example, like when he gets pressured and he gets away and he's able to throw it away, that's great. You don't get a sack, but like I think it was the 4th and 7 play, he got pressured a little bit. He threw one up to Kevin Austin, which actually probably wasn't the worst throw ever. It was decent, and if the safety doesn't make a good play, it's probably a touchdown. To be completely honest, with the way he had the corner beat, but it just seems so much more often than not when a team is able to put any sort of pressure on him. And this is where Oklahoma State was able to make their adjustments. The quick passing game that was huge for Notre Dame in the first half simply was not there in the second half. So Coan had to improvise a little bit, or he had to have better protection in the pocket, which worked at times in the second half, but certainly not enough, as we know. And then anytime he got any sort of pressure, ball was thrown away. Or on the one, I think it was on the one drive, he decided to try to make something with his legs on third and 10, and that's not going to work with someone like him. So that was certainly frustrating. And then the other one, this is a completely different point. So Ben, feel free to go however you want to go with this one after I mention this one. I think it was Eric Hansen who actually just moved to Rivals from the South Bend Tribune. Maybe it was Tyler James, but they said that Notre Dame's 3 best passing performances ever from a yardage standpoint have all come in losses. It was Joe Theismann back when he was a Notre Dame quarterback, Jack Coan today, and Brady Quinn in 2005 have all ended up in losses. And it makes you wonder. I mean, Notre Dame certainly put up enough points today to say that they should have won the game if the defense, held, even with the offense sputtering in the second half, as we've mentioned. But the lack of no running game, I think, certainly hurt them as the game went on.
Oh yeah, for sure. That 2005 game by Brady Quinn, on kind of a side note, that had to have been probably the Michigan State game that they lost. Because that would have been the year that was the Bush push year. But as I recall, they ran the ball actually quite a bit in the Bush push game. And the only other game I think they lost that year before the bowl game was Michigan State earlier that year. And I know that because I was at both of them. But
I'm going to try to find it while you're talking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense, to be honest with you. I mean, if you're having to throw the ball that much, that generally means you're not running it, right? I mean, and so, gosh, I don't know. Like, to me, like one of the bigger things, and I said it a little bit, but I didn't make a huge point of it earlier, was one of the biggest things that really bugged me was that Notre Dame made such strides in the running game throughout the year. And then it's like they got to their bowl game and they're like, well, forget that. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. If you run the ball a little bit more effectively, I mean, I think the broadcast said, and I know this wasn't how it ended because, there was obviously plenty of game left, but at some point in the second half, Oklahoma State had run like 42 plays and Notre Dame had run 19. I mean, that's just a real bad recipe for trying to hang on and win a football game of that caliber when Oklahoma State's offense is better than it played early, when better than, pretty explosive. Sorry about the dog barking there. He like D-Rock said, obviously he's upset as well. But and excuse the cough and all of this, the longer I talk, the worse it gets, of course. But I don't know, like no compliment, no anything that, there was nothing to stop the bleeding. It's like Notre Dame threw out their whole toolbox at the beginning and then didn't have the run game. And then, like I say, this is kind of what we're saying. Like maybe Tyler Buckner could have been the guy, the tool to stop the bleeding, move the ball a couple times, at least pin him deep. And then,
and he has shown so many times that it doesn't have to just be running with him too. He's made big plays in the passing game. mostly because he's able to bring more people into the box because they think that they have to stop the running game with him.
Right, exactly. So, or it's the RPO, it's the getting it out quick to Mayer after, as he gets out on the edge, or even just picking up 4 or 5 yards and sliding. Like, I don't know. The Notre Dame had no answers. And like I say, that's the overwhelming umbrella thing that you can say about this, is that there was no, how many times have we seen the script be flipped here? Notre Dame gets down big, fights back, but then the other team figures out how to win at the end.
Yeah.
And then you finally see Notre Dame actually come out strong, actually get a lead. I can't really recall, and, I don't know if I'm wrong, just tell me that I'm wrong, but I just can't recall a time where Notre Dame got up this big and blew it that way. And lost.
There was a stat, and I forget exactly how many games it had been, but essentially since 2004, Notre Dame has not lost a game when they've scored or when they've been up 21 points.
21. So I think it was 72 games.
It was like 79-0 since 2004. So this idea that, Notre Dame can't win a big game is chump, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is something that, in fairness, is unprecedented even for Notre Dame standards in these types of games. And I want to preface this by saying, before we kind of move on and talk about some other stuff, I don't think me and you, like, I know people are kind of coming in and probably think we're hyping up Buckner a little bit too much. It really isn't the idea that Buckner should have been playing over Coan. It's the idea Coan played, I think, very well overall today. I mean, the stats show that. Second half, like I said, is obviously sputtered, and I don't really think it was his fault that Notre Dame lost this game. So he doesn't really deserve any sort of hatred by Notre Dame fans today. It was just the idea that there were probably times in this game that something else could have been done, whether that means maybe trying to stick to the running game just a little bit more, even with Coan in there, or or going to Buckner. That's pretty much really what it came down to. I wanted to say, hey, stick to the short passing game, but obviously the short passing game wasn't there in the second half, so that was hard to stick to. And then obviously it came down to the defense not being able to make any plays, which I think the offense and in their inability to move the football in the second half caused that, or at least part of it. And before you talk, but I did find that stat. It was Joe Theismann for 526 yards in 1970 versus USC. That's number one. Jack Coan today for 509 yards, loss. And then Brady Quinn, like you mentioned, against Michigan State in 2005, which was also a loss. So it was I'm not saying that that's an indictment that that they should run the ball more necessarily. I mean, sometimes it's, if it's working, it's working. But it is an interesting stat.
Well, and I didn't really articulate this very well. So if I can rewind that a little bit, obviously if you're passing the ball a lot, generally that means you can't run it. But the other part is, if you're passing the ball a lot, you're either moving the ball a lot, okay, and your defense is on the field a whole awful lot, or you're not moving the ball a lot and the defense is on your field a lot. Now, obviously, if you're throwing for a lot of the yards, it just means that there's a lot of shorter possessions. And so, I think for our defense today is that, you scored so quick and so often a couple of times that, like, even when you had a real positive thing on offense, it's like the defense is like, oh my God, I just sat down. Like, can I just get another breather real quick? And, when you're down Cam Hart and you're, obviously don't have Kyle Hamilton because of, reasons that I know people have been arguing about in the comments, then you're not at full strength anyway. You don't have your full arsenal of defensive backs, and then they're on the field for 2/3 of the game, it feels like, and it's just not a recipe to win, like I say. So I keep using the phrase complimentary football. That's really what I mean. It's just that it would have been nice, even in some of those drives that went well for Notre Dame in the first half, would have been nice to maybe just mix in a couple run plays, take 2 more minutes of time off the clock, and not give Oklahoma State so many opportunities. And I really feel like that has a lot of emphasis, a lot of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, a big impact on what really ended up happening to Notre Dame today.